What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Royale. Today, a little bit of fun today. We're going to be talking about some Dynasty. We don't talk about Dynasty enough on this channel. So I wanted to kind of talk about some buys right now as the season progresses. Who do we like right now in terms of some buys? So we're going to go over some hey, long-term builds, some, hey, Dynasty now, go grab them to go try to win a championship. So we're going to be looking at 4 players today, who you can go buy in your Dynasty leagues, actual trade value, different sites of what their rankings are so we can kind of compare values and show you those trades in real Dynasty leagues. So you know the deal. Hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll dive into them on the other side. All right, let's get into the buys. And again, I wanted to go a little bit off the board, right? We're not just going to talk about bad players or good players. Just, okay, who are some buys out there considering where the week are at? And then we're going to talk about consistency, right? Like who is consistent out there? Who do you want to buy if you're contending? Who maybe you want to kind of maybe target if you're in a rebuild, or kind of that perpetual just going to try to, snag a guy that has good value right now. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. So first guy up, I'm going to talk about Deontay Johnson. He's my guy in terms of just being a value, right? So when we're looking at this, I use the fantasy calc a lot, and in terms of that, the database and what they show. So this will show kind of his dynasty value, trade value throughout the months, and it's going up a little bit. So when you're thinking of his dynasty value, because he's coming back, he injured that hamstring week 1. He's going to play against the Rams this week. This might be one of your last opportunities to go buy him, though, right? His current market valuation. So when we're looking at his market, he is wide receiver 46 on Keep Trade Cut. And whether you use Keep Trade Cut or not, that is what the market uses, right? So when we're thinking of some of the market out there, a majority of the market, because it's free, you need to understand where he's at. Our football guys rankings right now for Dynasty, he's at 36. And in our TDR here is 29 in our combined rankings that we have for everybody here at the site. So when you're looking at that, it fluctuates, right? But if you can get him at a wide receiver 46 price, how is he not going to return value, right? I think he's a very safe asset for a lot of different things. Rest of the season, I understand that Pittsburgh offense has been struggling. I understand with Kenny Pickett, it's hard to imagine him kind of, what does that look like? But I still think he's relatively young for the position, sitting at 27. He's safe for assets because he immediately kind of slots in as your wide receiver 2. Like when you're looking at Johnson, he can be a wide receiver 2 coming out of the gate, right? He scores some touchdowns. Now low end wide receiver 1. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for a guy that's getting valued at wide receiver 46 to surpass that value. Now, when you look at the deals that have been made, and these are 12-team Superflex PPR deals, you have Deontay Johnson for Tyjae Spears and a 25 third. Hey, I like Spears. I think that he does have some long-term value there. But if you're a contender, what are you doing with Spears right now? Right? Yes, maybe Henry gets moved or whatever that happens there. I still think Deontay Johnson, if you need that help at that wide receiver position, and let's say you have that running back position pretty shored up, Deontay's a fun piece to go grab. Then you have Deontay Johnson for Jerry Jeudy. I'd do that straight up, even if I was kind of maybe a middle of the pack, maybe even a rebuilder, because who's going to have more long-term value? If Johnson can performs well, is that solid wide receiver 2. At some point, what are we doing with Jeudy? We're just reaching for straws. And then we have Deontay Johnson in a second for Derrick Henry. Again, if I can ship Henry and I'm middle pack, I wouldn't say necessarily contender, unless you can maybe, if you feel like your running back positions, you're pretty sure up, you don't necessarily need Henry. You're concerned about that long term in terms of this season, and you get Johnson in a second, you could replace Henry with the second round running back this year, and then you get Johnson. That's how I would look at that deal. Now, my next guy, Matthew Stafford. So let's talk about Stafford. Hasn't been great, in terms of this, not a, barn burner here. But the way I look at Matthew Stafford as a buy for me is that, that quarterback 2 right now for a lot of the contending teams, it's hard to fill. If you have Mac Jones, you're hurting, right? If you have Dak Prescott, who has struggled, you're hurting. When you look at that second tier, and maybe you were in a spot where you didn't feel like you were a contender this year, but you look really good now. You have a QB1, but that's number 2 spot. You've been trying to have Ritter and Howe and all these guys. I feel like Stafford is that guy to go target, right? And I think that when you think of the offense that he's in, the numbers, the touchdowns are going to be there as the season goes. I do project that we see that passing offense. They're going to throw the ball. I think Stafford's a fun kind of piece to go buy for this year, right? When you're looking at what his rankings are, they're all around that 23 to 28 mark. Keep Trade Cut, it's at 23. At Football Guys, it's 26. Here, 28. But based on where he's going for in Superflex leagues, if you have a second and you feel like you're a contender and you want to go kind of shore up that, Given a second for Stafford, if it's a late second, I understand that piece. And I think that's a appropriate value for him. The other one is Stafford for Najee Harris. I don't really know how to value Najee Harris right now. I don't have any in my dynasty rosters just because I just never liked the profile. But if you feel like you need that piece, Najee not really scoring points for you, and you need a quarterback in Superflex, that's the price you pay, right? Then you have Stafford for Dobbs in a third. I understand that Dobbs is like okay, but if you can go get Stafford for Dobbs, and who would have thought that would have even been an option beginning this year? And a third, whatever, just throw it in. That's how you shore up that QB2 spot. And this is assuming you have a top 8 guy on the other side, right? That quarterback one. If that's the case, all for it, right? Go grab Stafford as that quarterback too. That's a good value there. My next buy here is Bryce Young. I'm going to throw in Bryce Young here. You can see where the market is trending. He had in March, he was higher. In May, it's kind of been trending down. And now it's probably at the lowest in terms of what we saw. We did see him throw that touchdown last week. So we saw that he does have 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions this year. The offense scares us. Frank Reich now is not doing play calling duties, which actually should be a positive in my opinion, because I can't watch Frank Reich call any more plays anymore. But I still think that Bryce Young is a fun buy if you're rebuilding, I guess. But if you need to shore up that area, because he's going to get opportunity, that QB2/3, depending on, let's say you have an aging QB2. Let's say you have Stafford and you have that, and you're a contender, like we just talked about. But you do know, I understand Stafford's got, he's 1 year at a time, right? When we're thinking buy, we're buying him this year. So Bryce Young, go get a Bryce Young as your QB3, kind of your developmental piece almost. You have him, you can plug and play him if you need to. I started Bryce in a few teams this league as my QB2, and I won based on the roster building where I was at. And then he gives you that foundational piece. And I do think the value is there right now for him. Keep Trey Cuddy's at 14, Football Guy's 15. Here at TDR, he's 12. So he's right in that range. But again, if you really feel like you can shore up that side, like look at this. Bryce Young for Dak Prescott in a second. Dak Prescott has been a QB 25 this year, right? And that second, yeah, it is valuable depending on where you have it, based on the running backs and the situation with the wide receivers in the 24 class. But if it's a late second, let's say it's a throw in or somebody else's, get Bryce Young, get younger at that position, right? Bryce Young for Daniel Jones in the first. I mean, there's some question marks about what Daniel Jones's neck injury looks like. I've heard all kinds of different things, out there. But then you have a first. It has to be late first, though. I'm not necessarily comfortable giving anything where I feel like it's 101 to like 106 or 7 in that range. But if it's after that and you want to get younger at the position, you got to understand the way the market dictates and values quarterbacks. It's hard to get a quarterback like Bryce Young for cheap, right? But then you have this one, Bryce Young in a first for Breece Hall. And this is the other side. If you feel like Breece Hall is, you want to go grab Breece Hall and you're willing to give up a first and Bryce for that, Bryce is a QB3, and you're going to go try to get that win now, then you go after that. But if you're sitting there with Breece Hall on a roster that's just not contending, the way how bad the running back market can be at times, and it just fluctuates, right? When you're thinking of the running backs, and you go get a young piece in Young and in a first, and depending on where that falls, another piece, a quarterback or a running back or a wide receiver in that range, I would do that. I would look at that and say, yeah, I can kind of build around that. It just depends on how your build is. If you feel like Breece Hall's not there. Now, you might want to shore a piece. Maybe you can get a better quarterback you feel like. Maybe go target CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson now that he's injured. It looks like he's going to be injured for the year. But I still think in this range is a good value. Now, last guy is T. Higgins. I'm going to say he's a buy right now. I know his weekly finishes haven't been great, right? So, 0 points in the week 1, and then you see that 28.9 the next week. Then you have 4.1, 3.9, and 4.0 fantasy points. That's not going to win us leagues, right? That's not going to win us weeks there. But he does have a very favorable matchups down the stretch of the season, like weeks 13 to like 16, 17 in that range. He could really just be that plug and play and get you a championship type move. If the Bengals decide to move on from him, which maybe looks like it's going to happen, he's a wide receiver one somewhere else. And no matter, even if he doesn't play a snap, in terms of the offseason, his value goes up easily, right? We're thinking, hey, wide receiver one, we know how Dynasty works. He is actually ranked right now as the lowest. I think I've seen him in 3 years. He is wide receiver 21 on Keep Trade Kai. That is really low. Whereas Football Guys, we have him at 9, and then TDR is wide receiver 13. So he's kind of across the board there. This is the lowest I've seen T. Higgins. So if you can go out and maybe grab T. Higgins for some of the prices that we see, and you're a contender, heck, even if you're kind of a rebuilder, some of these moves you could really kind of fast forward that rebuild, right? So T. Higgins for Sam Howell and Christian Kirk. I love Christian Kirk. I think Christian Kirk's a great fill-in piece. So it really depends on what your roster looks like. I like Kirk on a contending roster. I like Higgins though from a value perspective because you can flip Higgins for much more than you can Kirk later on, and especially if he goes off in the year, then he's a wide receiver one on a roster. Calvin Ridley's not going anywhere for Kirk. And so Higgins just has that perceived more value. Boom. Okay. There you're going to be able to capitalize on that and move Higgins if you need to, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you need to keep him on a roster. You can always just move him and get that value back. Then we have Higgins for George Pickens. I take T. Higgins over George Pickens pretty much every single time, just because George Pickens, there's a lot of people don't like George Pickens. And like when you look at it from like an analytical perspective, Pickens is always going to be down on those guys. So it limits the player pool and it limits your league. It really depends on your league mates. What do they go after? What do they prioritize? If you know your league is more of like a film based and they love just highlight catches, yeah, Pickens is going to be valued more, right? If you're looking at it from a perspective of analytics and other areas there, Pickens is not going to be valued. So understand your league mates, obviously. And then T. Higgins in a third for Puka Nacua. Give me T. Higgins all day. Like I like Puka. I think he came back to earth a little bit this last week, but he still has a high target share. I think he's still going to be okay in that offense. But if you can get Higgins in a third, yeah, that built-in valuation for Higgins is going to be there. Plus you get the third, the throw in. And so I'd take T. Higgins there. So those are some of the guys that I like buying right now. Just remember, everything is fluctuates every week. Everything is a microcosm of itself. When we're talking about leagues, someone's buy might be a sell in one league. So this is just kind of give you guys context of some guys that I like, depending on if you're rebuilding, you're trying to go win it now, maybe provide that roster help, Stafford, give you that QB2, and to show you real live trades that have happened recently in fantasy football. So you can see these things actually have happened, right? I'm not just saying go buy and not giving you context there. I always like to do that. And you might see the other side. You might like that and say, hey, no, I want to go get rid of T for that piece, that project that I saw there. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Let me know in the comments. Drop your quick trade questions in there. I'd love to answer them for you guys. And I'll check you guys next time.